Well, good morning. Hope you guys are doing great today. My name's Justin, and this is my wife, Trish, and we're excited to be here. We've had an amazing weekend with you guys, just kind of pouring into some couples and spending the weekend with couples. It's been beyond our expectations, and you just have an amazing pastoral staff. You have an amazing congregation. We've just been really blessed to be here. Just a little bit about us. We have 3 boys, 17, 14, and 10. So please pray for us. We've been married a little over 18 years. We got married when we were 12. And but our boys are at home. My mom left this morning. And so there's a gap between my mom leaving and us arriving. And so we're hoping that nothing burns down or gets broken or no punches are thrown between now and then. So, but we're excited to be here and excited just to share with you part of our story, but then hopefully allowing yourself to find yourself in our story as well.
Yeah, we're just excited to not only be here, but really have sensed all weekend just what God is doing among this church. It's really a gift to us to be able to have a front row seat to it. But regardless if you are 8 or 80, we're all dreamers, right? We come into life and we start dreaming big dreams. We don't get through high school and then graduate and then go, just going to hang out. You know, we don't graduate from college and hope that we have like the lamest degree possible, right? We dream big dreams. And so I'm interested, I'm going to freak them out. If you are in middle school, high school, or college, if you would stand up. They're like, what is she going to ask us to do? Wow, that's awesome. They were more than 9 o'clock. I was like, people, you could sleep in and come to this service, but I just want you to look around the room because I know for many of us, we've walked enough life that we had dreams that we were excited for, and then life happens, and those dreams have lost their luster. And if you want to rub elbows with people that are dreamers, that are in the midst of it, who are dreaming big dreams, rub elbows with these students. Because they have some audacious dreams. And I want you students to hear, if anything this morning, to never give up on your dreams. That as life gets hard, God has ordained and given you individually awesome dreams. You can sit down. And that was Justin and I. We met in college and not only fell in love with each other, but we fell in love with this idea that God had given us a dream. He'd given us a vision that we could change the world through the local church. That it just began stepping into ministry. And so we got married in 1995. Anybody get married in the 90s? Okay, right. She's the first one who I'm like, I got married in the 90s. Usually everybody else is like, yeah. Because getting married in the 90s meant big, ginormous, bedazzled dresses. I'm not lying, like bad dresses. In fact, I always joke like Barbie meets bedazzled, that's my dress. And if you can envision, those desert lizards when they get really mad, they're like, that was my veil. And so anybody who tried to take a picture with me, their eye was like kind of getting gouged out. But, that was our vision. But even more, Justin and I grew up in families where it was more lower middle income, so we didn't go on vacations. And the one vacation that Justin got to go on was to Holden Beach, North Carolina. And so he thought that would be a great place for a honeymoon. So we get through the wedding ceremony, and we were so excited because his parents allowed us to borrow their first brand new car ever. A 1995 Astro minivan. It was hot.
We were styling on our honeymoon. It was amazing.
It was amazing. But God knew that I needed that big old van for the big old dress. And so we get in it. People are honking. We're like, rock on. And so what should have just taken like 3 hours to the hotel ended up taking 8 or 9. My kids are like, Mom, you can make it bigger and bigger the older you get. But it did take a lot longer time, to the point where I looked at my young groom and said, if one more person honks their horn at me, I'm getting out of this van and they're going down. I know I'm married, people. After 9 hours of honking, I'm over it. So we finally get to the hotel, and the whole, carry me over the threshold was kind of kicked to the curb. And I was like, I just need to go to sleep. I need to go to sleep.
And sleep is the operative word there. And I'm thinking to myself, I know it's 4 a.m, but I didn't get married to go to sleep, right? I got married for some action, right? So let's light some candles. Let's throw on some music. Let's get this honeymoon started.
It's true. But his hopes were dashed when he may have heard his young bride crying in the bathroom, which is never a good sign. And so he knocks on the door. He's like, "Are you okay?" And through sobs, I'm like, "You need to go to Walmart." And he's like, "Walmart? What's at Walmart?"
Why am I going to Walmart at 4 o'clock in the morning? Apparently, as we arrived at the hotel, something else arrived for Trish. And so here I am, 4 o'clock in the morning, in my tux, 21 years old, walking down the feminine product aisle at Walmart. Now, I have a sister. I've never bought that for her, okay? And you know it's a bad day when the person that's working the night shift at Walmart feels sorry for you, right?
True. So God's word says that his mercies are new every morning, right? So we did go to sleep, and we got up the next day, and we finally made it to the beach. And a little unknown fact about me is that I'm Hispanic. My maiden name is Lopez. See it? No? Well, although I'm fair-skinned, I don't ever remember burning as a child. But you guys, the sun in the south is different. It is so different. We were on the beach for just a couple hours, and this young Mexican bride was burnt from head to toe. I mean, blistered from head to toe, to the point 4 days into our honeymoon, I overheard my husband on the phone with his dad.
You know it's a bad honeymoon if you have to call your father on your honeymoon? And she was blistered from head to toe, like no touching. Like don't get near me, right? The only thing that was touching her body was aloe vera. And so I called my dad. I'm like, "Dad, like, I don't, this isn't what I signed up for. I don't know what to do." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "It's been 4 days. There's been no action, all right? Like, we've gone to see 3 movies. That's all we've done. That's the most excitement that's been on this honeymoon." And he's like, "We're not even Catholic, but I think you can annul that. Just kind of, our bad, just walk away, fist bump, walk away, just."
It's been 18 years.
I'm still a little bitter about that.
But for the record, before you all just start feeling sorry for him, that in the very last day, we had all of this money. So we decided to go on a jet ski. 21-year-old husband, pent-up energy on a jet ski in the middle of the ocean. And so he gets on first, I get on second, and before I can even go over procedure of safety rules, my hair is flying straight up in the air, and I am holding on for dear life. And I look ahead, and I don't know if you've ever watched, 48 Hours, and you're watching it, and you're like, how could she be, just run, woman, come on, don't you see it? It was this type of moment. I should have never got on the jet ski in the first place, but then it got worse. When you know something bad's going to happen, time stops, and you're like, no. Well, this yacht was coming in, this party yacht, had people on top, you could hear the music, the people were loud, and all in one moment, I see what's going to go down. And my young husband sees the waves that this yacht is making, and he's like, "Oh, game on." I'm like, no. He's like, "Yeah." And so full throttle, I'm holding on for dear life. We hit the waves. I go flying so high up in the air that I was like, "What's up?" to the people on the party yacht because they could see me flying, and then belly flop right into the water. And when I came up out of the water, all my blisters had popped. And so, I know, amazing.
I was like, "Payback." No, I'm just joking. I didn't say that. I thought it, but I didn't say it.
So if you're engaged and I've totally ruined what a honeymoon should be, I'm really sorry. Or maybe for some of you, I made you feel better. But here's the point. Regardless of how crazy our wedding day or our honeymoon became, we still had this vision. We had this passion and big dreams that God was going to use us as a couple to change the world. And oftentimes, God gives us that vision and we step into it, but then it doesn't quite unfold the way we think it would. But we knew no matter how bad things would get, we would always not only be in love with each other, but be in love with the dream that we felt God had given us.
So Trisha and I got married the summer before my second senior year of of college.
Close.
Because I squeezed 4 years into 5. I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but I did one on the 5-year plan. My parents loved that. And so we got married the summer before my senior year. And so here we are, newlyweds, really excited to be married. And I'm finishing up school. And 4 months into our marriage, we realized that Trish doesn't have the flu like we think she does, that she's actually pregnant with our first son. And so that was a little bit of a shocker. And so here we are, newly married, just trying to figure that out, trying to finish up school and realize we're going to be new parents, and we are less than a year away from becoming full-time pastors for the very first time. And so in May of 1996, we moved to our very first ministry, and just a month and a half later, we had our very first child. And so we celebrate our 1-year anniversary, and 5 days later, our son is born. And so we dive headfirst into marriage, and now parenting, and now ministry. But we had this vision, and we had this plan that, hey, we love God, and we love each other. It's going to be okay. It's going to be awesome. God's got us. God is going to bless us. And so over the course of the next 7 years, we went from one student ministry to another student ministry, really pursuing the vision that God had laid on our hearts. But we knew in our heart that one day God was going to lead us to plant a church. And so in 2002, we came up with this brilliant strategy, this brilliant business plan, that we were going to sell everything that we owned. We sold everything that we owned, and we had $5,000 to our name, which really just means we didn't own a lot. And we had 2 kids at the time, and right before we decided to do this, we found out that we were pregnant with our 3rd child. But we were going to move to the north side of Indianapolis to start a church for people who didn't go to church, people who are far from God. And so we loaded up the last remaining items that we did own, and we had $5,000 to our name. We moved to the north side of Indianapolis. We knew 4 people in the town that we moved to, and our plan was by the time we ran out of this money, God should have a church to sustain us. Which sounds very faith-filled. It's very stupid. I don't recommend planning a church like that at all, but that was our plan. We just thought it was brilliant. And so we move on June 1st, 2002, and on June 9th, we had our very first church service, and 12 people showed up. And as a young church planner, you're looking for any sign at all that God may be in this. And I'm doing like a head count, and I'm thinking, 12 people? 12 disciples. It's biblical. It's going to happen, right? This is amazing. God is just blessing us like crazy. If people would have been wearing flip-flops, I thought, wow, they're dressing like Jesus. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it was just awesome. And so over the course of the next couple of months, God began to add to our little group. And so 12 people became 20 people, and 20 people became 35 people. And we had a couple churches in our area that came to us and said, hey, we've heard about your church. We've heard about the passion that you have for God and for this area, and we want to partner with you. We want to help resource you. We want to give you meeting space. We want to help, give you people. We want to tell our people to go with you, and because we believe in your vision, we believe in your dream. And it was like, man, it was just so incredible to see the church respond and receive us like that. And so over the next couple of months, our group grew from 35 to 75, and then in September of 2003, we launched public services, and over 200 people showed up to our very first service. And as a church planter and as a pastor, you have those seasons and those moments where you stand up in front of a group of people where the future is uncertain, and you paint a picture for a preferred future of what God could do if you trust him, what God might do if you give him everything, what God wants to do if all of us would come together and surrender and sacrifice for this mission that God has brought us on together. And this group of people did that. And from September of 2003 to Easter of 2005, God did an amazing thing in our church. We would talk about the book of Acts and talk about the first church and how the first church was sacrificial, and the first church loved each other deeply, and the first church worshiped God, intensely, and God added to their numbers daily those who were being saved. And we began to see that happen in our little church plant. People who were far from God started finding their way back to God. People who had not been to church in years or were de-churched or hurt by the church years ago started coming to church and started placing their faith in Jesus, and people were being baptized, and people were finding a home and community. And it was like everything that we had talked about and dreamed about was playing out before our eyes. It was like we were watching the book of Acts in real time. At Easter 2005, we had over 700 people that attended our services. We had just gone through a building campaign, and this little church, this little faith-filled church, average age of 28, 18 months old, raised over $1 million to buy the building that we were actually meeting in. It was just an incredible time of God's blessing. And if you looked at it from the outside, you would see, these young dreamers who had this vision that God began to come behind and put strength to and put wind in the sails of and allow this vision to come into a reality. But behind the scenes, things weren't so good in my own personal relationship with God. The foundation of my faith, I began to be more concerned with what I did for God than who I was becoming in Christ. And the foundation of my faith began to crack. And not only that, the foundation of our marriage relationship began to go downhill. And so as the church was going up and to the right, Trish and I began to drift. We began to drift far apart from each other, and we began to drift far apart from God. And it was something that talent, and it was something that smiles and handshakes could cover up for a while. But eventually, our relationship with God and our relationship with each other began to rise to the surface.
I don't know if you've ever been at that place where the vision that God has given you, or maybe the dream that you felt deep inside you, comes into fruition. Maybe for you it was graduating from that particular college, or finally landing that dream job. Maybe for you it was becoming a stay-at-home mom. Wherever you found yourself, you actually weren't dreaming about it, you were living the dream. And it's awesome to experience, but after a while, that dream starts to lose its luster, and you realize that even those dreams take work to sustain. And so here, Justin and I are in this church plant, and things are going up and to the right. From the outside, what to celebrate as successful people, we were achieving it and knocking it out of the park. So here we are, 2004, and we've grown so much that we were allowed to take a group of leaders, about 40 leaders from the church. It's not the entire church anymore, it's leaders. And we went on a retreat for Justin to cast vision about where we would go the next year. And I remember sitting in this room, and it was just electric. People were excited. There were stories being shared about people coming to Christ and who they were leading underneath them in their individual ministries. But I found myself sitting in the back, watching Justin, and feeling like I didn't even recognize the man who was speaking. As everybody else celebrated, not only did I feel bitterness towards Justin, I felt bitterness towards the bride of Christ. Because the bride of Christ was no longer a partner in ministry. The bride of Christ had become a mistress. That I was competing for her, against her, for Justin's time and attention. And she was getting in the way. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place where you know that you are either going to choose in the next moments to become a healthier person, to find help, or you're going to choose destructive behavior. And maybe like me, you found yourself kind of having a one-on-one conversation, just with you, just warring against your own heart. And I just remember thinking, I know that I feel bitterness. I know I feel resentful, but God, I know I feel like you're calling me to share it, but who am I going to share it with? Who am I going to go to that they're not going to be like, the pastor's wife's lost her mind. She just called the bride of Christ a mistress. I mean, that's nuts. And so I convinced myself in that moment that I could contain it. I could just be a little bitter. I could be just a little resentful. What I didn't know at that time is that you can't be just a little bitter. That it becomes a resentment that becomes like a cancer, that it starts to affect not just you and not just your marriage relationship, but it starts to affect how you parent. It starts to affect how you connect with friends, how you connect with coworkers. And so for the next year, I just found myself in this downward spiral where I'd become awesome at coming to church and playing the role and hugging people and kissing babies, because that's part of who I am. But inside I was dying. And no longer was I fighting with Justin for this vision. I was fighting against him. So 2005, it's our 10-year anniversary, and we decided to go on a cruise, and we were at such a dark place with each other that I didn't even want to go on the cruise with them, to be honest. But I went, and God provided an audacious miracle. We had so much fun. Like, so much fun. Like, probably pictures we shouldn't show, like Ed's dad fun. Like, it was so fun. And it was the first time in 10 years that Justin and I had gotten away together. There was no kids, there was no ministry, there was no cell phone, no laptop. It was just he and I. And I fell head over heels for him. But then we had to go back. And I remember coming back into the States and sitting down at a restaurant, and cell service returned and Justin's cell phone rang. And I wasn't prepared for my reaction, but I just started bawling. And Justin, I mean, to his defense, he's like looking at me, he's like, woman, I just took you on a cruise. Like, it should take you more than, 5 minutes to start crying, like 24 hours or something. It's like the honeymoon all over for him. But with that phone call, It signified what we were going back to. And I knew the life that we were going back to would not cultivate romance like a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. What I wasn't prepared for was how far and how fast and how dark our relationship would become. That no longer were we fighting for each other and no longer were we fighting against each other. We were just done fighting.
You know, I think what the cruise allowed us to do, looking back on it, is it allowed us to treat the symptom of our pain, but not really treat the cause of our pain. You know, and so we get away from ministry, we get away from our life, we get away from our routine, and we go and we do something different. We change our behavior for a few days, and it elicits new feelings. And so the pain of our marriage problems dissipates, and it goes down, but we didn't really change our hearts. We just changed what we did for a few days. And so we go back into our routine and into our normal life and into the patterns of behavior and the dysfunctional cycle that we had been in for the previous 10 years. Nothing changed except for our cruise. And so we go back and we realize over the next few weeks and over the next couple of months that there is a gap. There's a gap between the marriage that we have and the marriage that we thought we would have. And maybe you've been in there in your life. Maybe some of you came in here this morning where there's a gap between what you thought God was going to do with your life and what God has actually done with your life. There's a gap between your relationship with God, and you thought when you came into a relationship with God that He was going to heal everything and make everything better and make all the pain go away and reconcile all relationships. And now you just see this huge discrepancy between what the life that you thought you were going to have with God and the life that you actually have with God. The intimacy that you thought you were going to experience with God and the intimacy that you actually experience with God. And there's this huge distance between what you thought life was going to be and what life actually is. Maybe for you, it's your marriage relationship. And the marriage that you thought you signed up for isn't the marriage that you're living out now. And you live in the same house and you do the business of marriage. You get the kids off to school and you attend all the PTO functions and you go to all the baseball games. But there's a huge gap between what you thought marriage was going to be and what it actually is. And so you share a house, but you don't really share life. What do you do with that gap? How do you reconcile that gap? You know, Trisha and I had this assumption that longer married equaled better marriage. So here we are 10 years into marriage, and we just thought that we would be more in love and get along better and have more audacious dreams and goals 10 years in than we did 1 year in. Because we just assume the longer I'm married, the better my marriage is going to be. But that wasn't the case for us. Longer married didn't equal better marriage for us. Longer married meant more irritable. Longer married meant longer fights. Longer married meant less patience. Longer married meant shorter tempers. Longer married meant less forgiveness. And all this cycle of dysfunction and all the warring against each other, it finally culminated on October 9th, 2005. I came home from church on a Sunday afternoon, and I sat down on the edge of the bed. And Trish was laying down for an afternoon nap, and I said, "Hey, we need to have a conversation." And she said, "Okay, about what?" I said, "About us." She's like, "Okay, what about us?" I said, "I'm done." She's like, "You're done with what?" I said, "I'm done with you. Like, I'm out. I don't want to be married anymore." She kind of sat up in the bed. She's like, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "I'm not in love with you anymore. I don't want to be married to you anymore. I don't want to be in ministry anymore. I don't even know if I want a relationship with God anymore. I'm having an affair. It's with your best friend. I want to build a life with her. Like, I'm done." Cold, calculated, heartless. You know, if you've ever been in a dark place, you almost have to divorce yourself from the damage you're doing to the people close to you and the damage you're doing to God and yourself. And so there was just no emotions. She got up and left the house, and a few minutes later, one of our elders called, and I just remember him saying, screaming to me on the phone, "Is this some kind of sick joke?" And I just said, "Hey, you need to call all of the leaders of the church together." So they came over to our house, and Trisha had left and gone to a friend's house, and I just sat there, cold, heartless, and just resigned my position. And they sat there for 2 hours trying to talk me out of the destructive behavior and destructive decisions that I was making, not to keep me as their pastor, but just to rescue me as their friend. And I just wouldn't hear it. And I had cheated on them too. A few hours later, Trisha called, and she didn't want me to stay at the house anymore, and so I went and checked into a hotel. And as I arrived at the hotel, a lady that was with Trish called me, and she simply said, if you have any desire at all to reconcile and restore your relationship, you'll show up at this counseling appointment that we've made for you tomorrow. And so the next day, I went to this counseling appointment, and I began to go to counseling over the next couple of days. And Trish and I didn't have any contact with one another verbally for the next 10 days. A couple days into me going to counseling, a friend of mine came and offered me a place to stay. And he just said, hey, you can stay with us until you either get divorced or you guys put it back together. And I wasn't in a place where I thought that our relationship was going to work. I was just in a place where I was willing for our relationship to work. And I went into his house to see where he was going to allow me to stay. And I walk into his daughter's bedroom where they had moved her out into her sister's room, and everything I owned was stacked up against the wall. And the damage and the consequences of my choices just kind of flooded over me. And Trish and I didn't speak. We had a mediator that helped us get our kids back and forth, helped me to see the kids a couple of times a week. And on that 10th day, she called me on my cell phone. And I tell people all the time, if the prodigal son's dad would have had a cell phone, it would have been a call that he would have made. And she simply said, I hear you're going to counseling. And I said, yes. And she said, I'm willing to go with you. And so on that 11th day, we started going to counseling together. We went 4 days a week for the next month. I tell people that's how messed up we were. We went 4 days a week. So if you go once a month, you're really not that bad. We were in really bad shape. 4 days a week for the next month. And God began to use those counseling sessions to peel back layers of our hearts and layers of dysfunction that we had built up over the first 10 years of our marriage that would at least set us up to restore our relationship.
And for me, the nature of the vision that God had given us for our life, a calling to ministry and ministering to people, with those words, I'm leaving you, I lost everything. I lost my best friend. I lost my husband. I lost my home. But I think the most painful part is I was losing the only identity that I had known as an adult thus far. And I just remember just being furious with God that I had been faithful. Like I was faithful to you, God. I was the one who did all the things right. And now for what? For this? Like this is where you left me? But what I realized is I had spent so much time trying to change Justin. I'd spent so much time with thoughts of if he would just do this, then our marriage would be okay. That I never allowed God to change me. And to do something over and over again and expect different results is the definition of what? Insanity. It's insanity. And that's how I lived. I just lived an insane person. Just hoping that I could create something or keep it safe or I could control it. So remember opening up my Bible and turning to a passage found in Hebrews chapter 12. It says this, "For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best that they knew how. But God's discipline is always right and good for us because it means we will share in His holiness. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterwards there will be a quiet harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. So take a new grip with your tired hands and stand firm on your shaky legs. Mark out a straight path for your feet. Then those who follow you, though they are weak and lame, will not stumble and fall, but will become strong." And this passage became my heart cry. I was tired. I was done. I was tired of trying to control things, and all God was asking me was just to surrender, to become broken before Him, and to lean in His discipline, to trust that it would lead me to a place of holiness. And as I'm looking at my 3 small kids and thinking, I have no idea what our future looks like. I don't know what the vision will be for our family anymore. To read those words, mark out a straight path for your feet, then those who follow you, though they are weak and lame, will not stumble and fall, but will become strong. And in that moment, somebody handed me the phone, and it was a counselor from Focus on the Family, and I remember through tears just pleading, just tell me how to woo him home, and I'll do it. Just tell me how to get him home. And I remember him saying to me, if you truly love Justin, you'll let him go. I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, listen, that's the worst advice ever, and you need to be fired. Like, give me your advisor. All Southside Chicago church is coming out because this ain't good. But the thing that he would say next would forever change my life. I said to him, if I let him go, he's going to choose her. If I don't control the situation, he's going to choose her. And he just simply replied, he already has. And that was the marking, the first time that I chose not to run, not to hide, not to control, but to say, okay, God, I'm going to trust you. And the beauty about losing everything is the only thing you have left is God. And you get a front row seat to see him be the God who did say he was with me yesterday in the mess. He's today is with me in the mess, and he'll be with me tomorrow. But oftentimes it takes us choosing that path. It takes us choosing to step into that brokenness.
You know, I think so often Trisha and I get asked to speak quite a few different places, and the affair gets all the attention. You know, it's the bomb that we drop at different places. It's why people want to know our story. But you know, we've only been sharing our story publicly. This happened almost 8 years ago. We've only been talking about it for the last 4 years. And before we ever spoke about it, before we were asked to write a book, we didn't seek to write a book or be speakers or travel. God just kind of opened those doors for us. But one of the things that we realized along the way is that long before the affair, we had an ordinary marriage. In every place we go, in every congregation, every conference that we attend or speak at, we see people who are settling for far less than what God intended, just like we did. And that's our heartbeat, that's our passion. We didn't write a book about an affair. We wrote a book about how we are so tempted to live life so far below the vision and the dream that God has for us, and how we can recapture that. Because an ordinary marriage is really an overflow of an ordinary relationship with God, and we can't expect anything in our life to be extraordinary. We can't expect John 10:10 to come to fruition, where Jesus says, I come to give you life and life to its fullest, if we have an ordinary relationship with God. And so in just the few minutes that we have left with you guys today, we want to leave you with a couple of practical things, whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you're single again, whether you're married again, to really dial in with how can you allow your life, not your marriage, not friendships, but your own personal relationship with God. How can you take that beyond the ordinary state that it may be in today? And the first thing is that ordinary is defeated as we learn to tell the truth. Ordinary is defeated as we choose to tell the truth, to be truth tellers. And one of the things I realized as we went through our first 30 days of counseling is that I was a really good liar. I stood on a stage every day and pretended like everything was okay in my relationship with God when it really wasn't. And I got really good at skirting the truth, exaggerating the truth, withholding the truth to make myself look more spiritual than what I really was. And so we go to counseling, 4 days a week for the first month. And at the end of that, our counselor's like, hey, you guys are a really pivotal point of recovery. Like, Trisha's starting to trust some of the words that you're saying. Trust is starting to be rebuilt in your relationship. If you've left anything out about the affair, now's the time to share it. And I knew in my heart I had. I knew in my heart I'd withheld details because in my mind I thought, if she knew that, it's over. That's a deal breaker. And so I decided to confess those other details 30 days in, and Trish just flipped out, got up and left. Our counselor's mad at me because I've been lying to him too. And Trish, we thought she'd left the room, she left the building. So I found a ride back to the house I was staying at, and I get a call from a lady in our church, and she said, Trisha's going to file for divorce because you're incapable of telling the truth. And something about that phrase, incapable of telling the truth, just flipped a switch in me. And I just thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be divorced, and I'm going to be the same person anyway. And I don't want to be the same person. I don't want to be an exaggerator. I don't want to be a liar. I don't want to be a withholder of truth. I want to be different. Even if not for Trish, for me, I focused on how do I jump through all the hoops she needs me to jump through to make our marriage better. I never really considered how to make my relationship with God better, how to be a person of integrity, how to be somebody who could be trusted, and to know that as I'm speaking that the words that are coming out of my mouth are the truth, in fact. I want to be that. I want to restore a relationship with God that I've never had before, that I've always pretended to have. How can I have that? A few days later, I came over to the house to pick the boys up for school, and Trish invited me in, and she said, "This is your last chance. I want to know everything." And I took a deep breath, and I just said, as far as it pertains to that relationship, I've told you everything, but I have a lot more to tell you. I said, I was sexually abused when I was a kid, and I've never told anyone. I've never talked about it. I've never gotten help for it. And it doesn't excuse the choices that I've made, but the choices that I've made have been skewed by this abuse. And I want to find healing for that wounded part of my heart. I've had a 10-year pornography addiction, and I've denied it to you, and I've hid it from you, and I've tried to convince you that I didn't struggle in that area. And I know I don't find freedom from it today, but I want to start the path of freedom, and this isn't really about you. Even if you never want to be married to me again, if you never want to see me again, you can have the house, you can have everything. This is about me being the person that God has created me to be. And in an act of grace and mercy, unlike anything I'd ever experienced, she simply said, now we can start over. Now we can begin again because I finally know the real you. And that conversation gave way to what would be a 2-year restoration process in our relationship where she learned to trust me again and I learned to be a person of truth. But one of the things that I've learned along the way is that 80% of the truth will never lead you to 100% intimacy. You see, the word intimacy, it means to be fully known, and that's God's greatest desire for you, is to be fully known by Him and to be fully known by the person that you're married to or that you choose to marry. And I think sometimes we convince ourselves that we can share part of the truth with God. And I thought, man, this is just a part of my life, God. It's not really that, I come to church, I sing the songs, I raise my hands, I'm in a small group. My gosh, I'm giving 10% back to you even. That should be enough. And God wants all of us. He doesn't want portions of our heart. He wants all of our heart. And so when we give God part of us, we can never experience the ultimate intimacy that He's designed for us to experience with Him. When we withhold the truth, we put a lid on the intimacy that we're created to experience. And so often I talk to couples, and so often we talk to people who they just don't understand why them and their spouse aren't on the same page or aren't clicking on all cylinders. They don't understand why they're creating this, why they feel this distance in their relationship with God. And my first question is, are you being honest? Are you being honest with yourself, and are you being honest with God, and are you being honest with your spouse? And so the question I leave with you today is, are you willing to be a truth teller? Are you willing to be a person of truth? Because maybe the distance that you feel in your marriage has nothing to do with your marriage. Maybe it's created distance in your marriage because you haven't really been experiencing the intimacy that God has designed for you to experience with Him. And maybe today is just the Father calling you home and saying, hey, I know all about you. I know every single secret you've tried to hide from me, and I love you anyway. Will you allow my love to bring you out of hiding, to be a person of truth?
And lastly, to live beyond ordinary, we have to choose to forgive. And I know even just with saying the word, there's just an instant emotion that comes up when we say the word forgiveness. What I had to come to terms with the fact that I had a forgiveness issue long before the affair. I had mastered unforgiveness. And I had to allow God to teach me how to even start the journey. And it begins when we allow ourselves to grieve the situation. When we feel that deep, overwhelming, almost take our breath away sadness that this is our reality. Grieving provides a pathway to the healing process. It's not coming to church on Sunday morning where you all fought in the car, and you just grounded every single child you possibly could or who understood it. And then you walk into, the sanctuary and you see Pastor Ed and he says, how you doing? And you're like, we're good. And then you whisper to your child, tell him you're good.
Nobody's ever done that.
No. But you're saying, I'm not good. Your response isn't fake. It's not inauthentic. You're saying, you know what, Pastor Ed, I'm really not doing good. My husband's not here with me today because we got into a huge fight. I'm not doing good because I asked my boyfriend to come and he was too hungover. It's being authentic and feeling and allowing yourself to say, when you begin the healing process, you're saying, this is my reality. And oftentimes what follows that is we feel anger. We feel angry over our situation. And for most of us, church culture has taught us that anger is not a good thing. But what God was teaching me is that in the path to forgiveness, anger is part of it. Anger is a gift from God. And when you think about what's happened in our nation over the past couple of months, even this past year, we don't watch the stories and go, man, that's kind of a bummer. I mean, we watch it and we get angry. There's injustice that's taken place, and in our anger, we get up and we do something about it. And God was saying, I've given you the gift of anger so that you will stand up and do something about it. But what I was choosing over and over again was bitterness and living in the insanity of that. What God was saying is, I just want you to choose brokenness, to give it up and just give it to me. And I really thought I had mastered forgiveness. Like I wanted a button that said, I'm number one in forgiveness, like I had figured it out. Because I had forgiven Justin, but then God asked me to offer that same forgiveness to my best friend. So I wrote her a letter and I told her that I loved her, that I forgave her, that God had given me a view beyond this myopic view of this woman who had ruined my life, but really a panoramic view of the fact that we're all just broken, messed up people. And maybe you've done that, you've stepped into the process and you've offered forgiveness, but for me, a week went by and 6 months went by and then a year went by and I heard nothing in response. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't just furious with her, I was furious with God. Because I know that passage in the Bible, in Matthew, that says, when Peter says to Jesus, how many times should I forgive? And Jesus says 70 times 7. Well, I'm like, God, I'm not good at math. I have no idea what that means. But that's all I knew of forgiveness. And God, you asked me to step into this process, and I just felt like I was yelling up to the cross and saying, you know what? You have no idea. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything when you've done nothing wrong. You have no idea what it's like to be betrayed by a best friend. You have no idea to feel like the Father has turned his back on you and he's not listening. I offered forgiveness and it blew up in my face. And in that moment, I just felt like God just quietly whispered to my heart, I do. I do. I do know what it's like. And in fact, I chose to die a painful death on the cross. I chose to take on your sin so that you could walk in the freedom of forgiveness. I chose that for you, regardless if you chose me. And that's when I realized that true forgiveness is when we offer it regardless of the person's response. And maybe you're saying, but if I do that, they win. That person wins, and they don't win. Christ wins. Because he wins a piece of your heart, and it doesn't excuse their behavior. It just keeps that behavior from destroying your heart, and it allows you to walk in the freedom that God has always had a vision for. And I believe that passage isn't about a mathematical equation. I believe that God is saying it's a process, that it may be something you have to choose over and over and over again. But when you do, you get to walk in freedom that I can honestly say, if my best friend walked in this room now, I would embrace her and love her like the heart of a father did with the prodigal son. Not out of my own will, not out of my own power, but because I know Jesus would do the same for me. And I want to leave you with this because I know that there's some of you that the person you need to offer forgiveness to is yourself. And you need to hear that the ground is level at the foot of the cross, that we have all sinned, we have all fallen short. And God is asking you, he's pleading with you to step in, believe that no matter what you've done, that he doesn't make you better, he makes you new, he makes you white as snow. And so we leave you with this question, will you choose? Will you choose it? Because your spouse can't choose it for you, Pastor Ed can't choose it for you. You have to choose it. And that decision is left up to you today, to believe that where forgiveness is given, freedom comes in return.